all yours, man.
Howdy everyone! So Sony recently announced that they'll be exhibiting every Spider-Man movie in theaters again, and because of it, I've naturally had my favorite silver screen run for the character on my mind lately. For the longest time, the 2002 through 2007 Raimi iteration of the character was Spider-Man for me. At a time before I more seriously got into comics, or saw any of the TV adaptations outside of the occasional rerun of the 90s animated series, this was the version of the character that I defaulted to whenever someone mentioned Spider-Man. Heck, he's still the version of the character that I associate with the most, to the point of his costume being my favorite one to wear in the Insomniac games, and to the point where one of my favorite things to do in that game is swing around to Danny Elfman's scores for the first two films. Raimi's Spider-Man movies were the first trilogy that I'd ever seen in theaters, and some of my most vivid memories from my childhood was going to my local movie house, which just closed over the winter in order to see him opening weekend. They were also among the first superhero movies I had ever seen too, for while I was familiar with the likes of Batman and Superman from their DCAU incarnations and their older live-action movies, Spider-Man left an especially large impact on me thanks to the fact that I lived a short drive from his stomping grounds, New York City. Because of this, as well as my eventual adoration for Sam Raimi's movies in general, I've always had a soft spot for this version of the character.
I like you.
Even something like Spider-Man 3, which I know people love to dunk on, is a movie that I genuinely enjoy in spite of its issues. Because for me, Raimi's take on the character keys in on my favorite aspect of Spider-Man as a series. That it's low-key just a soap opera that happens to feature a superhero whose greatest deficiency is that he can only help others as opposed to himself. That, combined with Raimi's brand of humor, its delightfully early 2000s stylization, and the fact that each of the movies very closely mirror Christopher Reeve's tenure as Superman, makes Spider-Man one of my favorite trilogies. And you know what else I like? The Matrix. I recently resaw The Matrix for the first time since my sophomore year in high school, and man, does that movie hold up. It's got great action and choreography, is probably the fastest 2 hours and 16 minutes you'll ever experience thanks to its tight pacing, and has a visual language that's so iconic that everyone basically stripped it for parts by the time its own sequels came out. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Raimi's Spider-Man was one of those movies, even if it was a lot more subtle about it and really only took some influence from it as opposed to outright copying The Matrix. A lot's been said over the years about how his first flick featuring the Webhead uses puberty as a language or point of reference for Pete developing his powers, lest we forget that hilarious shot of Peter's room after he discovered his webbing. But I've actually had a harder time finding discussions of 2002 Spider-Man in relation to what it owes to The Matrix than I thought I would. Which is really strange to me because it's something I kept thinking about while I was rewatching The Matrix.
Oh, déjà vu.
What did you just say?
Nothing, just had a little déjà vu.
In fact, I even found that these similarities transcended the film's visual language. In conjunction to the more obvious stuff like Peter's spider sense mirroring bullet time, there are tons of parallels between both stories on a thematic level, with some of them even bleeding into 2004's Spider-Man 2. So today, I thought it'd be fun to sit back and run through a couple of the ones I noticed during my most recent rewatches of both movies. Because why not, right? Before I continue though, I do want to clarify that I'll primarily only be looking at the first Matrix and the first two Raimi movies today. I did briefly consider also talking about Spider-Man 3, maybe even Spider-Man No Way Home and the other three Matrix movies, but I ultimately chose not to. To be honest, the similarities had already started to fade by Spider-Man 2 outside of the stuff I'll talk about here, and while there might be a couple of them in Spider-Man 3 for all I know, I figured it wouldn't really matter in the case of this video. Plus, it's not like the second or third Matrix movies were even out while they were writing and producing Spider-Man 2, so it wouldn't have made much sense to hold them up against two movies that couldn't have realistically taken much, if any, influence from them. Like, The Matrix Reloaded dropped in May 2003, and Spider-Man 2 started shooting a month earlier in April, you know? That said, I'd be down to hear any similarities you can think of for those movies over in the comments though. So like, yeah, feel free to help yourself there, bro. At their core, 1999's The Matrix and 2002's Spider-Man are a pair of actualization stories. Peter Parker is a nerdy orphan that lives with his aunt and uncle that develops neat and unnatural spider powers. With them, he comes to discover the power and bravery he's probably had inside of him all along, as well as learns the famous lesson that with great power comes great responsibility. Similarly, The Matrix is about Thomas Anderson, a talented programmer who moonlights as the illustrious hacker Neo. His arc in his movie can best be explained as him discovering who his true self is when he learns that he lives in the Matrix. He develops new skills and talents thanks to this discovery and ultimately becomes the One, a person that's destined to protect and save humanity from its AI overlords and liberate them from being glorified Duracell batteries. Both of these characters are somewhat based on a sense of duality and struggle to pick who they want to be for the rest of their lives.
Pete, look, you're changing. I know. I went through exactly the same thing at your age.
No, not exactly.
Peter, these are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
Peter doesn't necessarily want to be a superhero at first. He wants to use his superpowers to further his stock as Peter Parker. It's only after Uncle Ben dies that he crosses the threshold and truly becomes Spider-Man as we know the character today, though that's notably not without him continuing to struggle to balance both identities. Likewise, Thomas Anderson/Neo makes the choice to cross over into a painful reality, then spends the rest of the movie trying to figure out whether or not he's really the person Morpheus thinks he is.
It seems that you've been living two lives. One of these lives has a future, and one of them does not.
It's only after Morpheus is captured that he starts to exhibit signs of being the person he's told he is, and it's only after he's literally killed that he's able to tap into his full potential. For lack of a better term, he spends most of the movie thinking he's Thomas Anderson and not the One, until he's able to believe in himself enough to take a leap of faith. A leap of faith, by the way, that is basically directly mirrored in Spider-Man when Peter learns that he can jump across rooftops and that he can shoot webbing, as well as again when he's chasing Uncle Ben's killer. This idea of a leap of faith is further extrapolated on in the second movie. In Spider-Man 2, Peter loses his powers and resumes life as only Peter Parker in a deconstruction of his own origin story. However, we learn that his problems are largely existential and have to do with him not believing in himself anymore. So, to show Peter attempt to regain his powers after he decides to become Spider-Man again, Raimi puts Tobey on a roof to test whether he's re-Maguired them or not. It's the same visual language from the first movie being used in the same exact way. And because the movie wants to heighten the drama and keep him powerless for just a hair longer, we even get a delightfully Raimi spin on how the leap of faith scene ended in The Matrix.
My back! What does that mean?
The way Peter's spider sense mirrors bullet time builds on this further. I mean, it draws a direct parallel between both movies' cinematic languages. Peter is able to act with reflexes that border on precognition, similar to how Neo can move as fast as an agent. And both characters even have these abilities first manifest when they or someone they know is in immediate danger of getting hurt. It's even the signal that Pete's gotten his powers back in Spider-Man 2, as it prevents him and MJ from getting crushed by a car that Doc Ock threw at them, which honestly didn't really make that much sense, because if he was trying to get Peter to get Spider-Man so that he could bring Spider-Man to Harry in order to get the tritium, he probably shouldn't have thrown a sedan at him.
Butterfingers.
And then there's the point of the movies themselves. If you take a step back from The Matrix and view that first movie as a self-contained story, as in the context that the people who made the first Spider-Man movie would have had back in the day, you'll see that the stakes at play are surprisingly personal. The first Matrix isn't really about stopping the machines or saving humanity. It's about Neo recognizing what his place in the world is, and later about him rescuing Morpheus. Similarly, Spider-Man isn't about saving the world from some evil plot by the Green Goblin. It's about him cementing who he is as a person and then later saving MJ from certain death. The payoff for both of these movies is that these characters have grown, to the point of them both ending with a monologue where they finally accept their calls to action and come to understand who they are. Neo is the One. the person destined to bring about the end of the Matrix, and he flies off into the city in order to presumably do just that. Peter rejects MJ because he's decided that he has to in order to protect the people he loves from getting hurt while he's Spider-Man. He accepts that as a cost of living and then swings off into the city as a hero. These are some pretty big similarities once you put them beside each other, aren't they? Now, one could argue that both movies are simply rooted in the same basic storytelling archetypes, but to do so would downplay how they share the same basic idea that people endowed with massive potential, whether that be because they're the manifestation of a prophecy or because they've been chosen for excellence by happenstance, should use their incredible skills for the betterment of society. And like, yeah, that's pretty basic prophecy superhero origin material, but Spider-Man uses bullet time in its visual language. It was obviously made with some of the Matrix's DNA in it. Likewise, Spider-Man and Neo's main obstacles in both of these movies, the Green Goblin and Agent Smith respectively, are fairly similar in how they represent the ideological opposite of their position. They're both the result of science and technology. While their abilities are, for all intents and purposes, comparable to that of our hero, they're cold and hell-bent on preserving the status quo. Norman Osborn uses his powers to preserve Oscorp's interests, then later to rid the world of Spider-Man for being a threat to him. Agent Smith similarly exists as a creation by the machines to ensure that all remains well within the Matrix. They have supernatural abilities and exist to make sure that nobody challenges them. Furthermore, this entails using normal people to prop themselves up even higher. The machines do this by using human beings as an energy source, and Norman just straight up says as much during the rooftop scene with Peter.
And those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders. You, me, we're exceptional.
They also have vaguely militaristic or law enforcement coded backgrounds. The agents are a glorified FBI/CIA type force, and Norman is in the weapons manufacturing game. The agents are products of the Matrix itself, which is heavily represented across the movie and pop culture as a whole with the color green, while Norman's villainous alter ego is literally called the Green Goblin. Sure, that's coincidental, seeing as the Green Meanie is Spider-Man's most famous adversary, but I still think there's some intentionality there. I mean, here's a shot that basically appears one-to-one in both movies. Agent Smith punches a pillar during the subway fight against Neo in glorious slow motion, and the Green Goblin does the same exact thing during his final fight with Spider-Man. There's also Norman's infamous which could very easily be read as a spiritual cousin to Smith saying no right before Neo wails on him with a minigun. If you want to get even more weird about it, the Green Goblin's first public attack, not counting the Quest Aerospace one because nobody knew it was him as far as we can tell, takes place at the World Unity Festival, an event that we can infer must have taken place in or around 2001. And the rise of the machines in the Matrix happened to take place in the early 21st century, as stated by Morpheus.
We have only bits and pieces of information, but what we know for certain is that at some point in the early 21st century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
AI.
Now, these are obviously two very different pieces of media, but also, come on. That's a pretty big similarity for both things to have happened during some sort of Unity celebration. Another similarity between both movies, though one that I think is a lot more subtle and open to interpretation, are the characters of Trinity and Mary Jane. They both exist as the obvious love interests for our protagonists, and while MJ is definitely more of a damsel in distress than Trinity is, they exist as a confirmation for who our protagonist is at their core. At some point prior to The Matrix, Trinity had been told that she would fall in love with the One, and the revelation of that to the audience comes seconds before Neo is brought back from the dead. By her logic, she knows that Neo is the One because she loves him. It isn't his 90s Keanu Reeves-ness or his ability to look capital B badass in a duster that makes him the one for her. Her love for him is what confirms that Neo is special, not literally, but thematically. As for Mary Jane, while she doesn't have a prophecy to fall back on, or an oracle for that matter, she spends the movie falling increasingly in love with Spider-Man because of how he keeps saving her from certain doom.
You have a knack for getting in trouble.
You have a knack for saving my life.
I think I have a superhero stalker.
I was in the neighborhood.
But by the final proper scene of the movie, we learn that she realized she actually loves her shy next door neighbor Peter Parker, and that he was the one she was thinking about while she was falling from the bridge.
There was only one person who I was thinking of. And it wasn't who I thought it'd be. It was you, Pete. I kept thinking, I hope I make it through this. So I could see Peter Parker's face one more time.
By the time Spider-Man 2 rolls around, she even goes as far as to say that she thinks she's always known that Peter was Spider-Man. It's a notion that feels fairly well earned after the two movies all but came short of just saying as much through visual storytelling, as well as Kirsten Dunst's performance. As for what it means in relation to Peter, well, let's try and apply the same logic that we did to Trinity to it. Mary Jane believes that she's in love with Spider-Man, which is ironic because he's her best friend, Peter Parker, a guy who's been in love with her since they were kids. However, she doesn't consciously know that they're the same person, so there's a sort of divide between them that goes undiscussed. But by the end of the first movie, Mary Jane realizes that she does love Peter, which is naturally affirming to the guy, even if he ultimately tells her that he can't be with her. It's the last thing he learns before he puts his foot down and declares that he's Spider-Man.
Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
In both films, regardless of whether or not it was the director's intent, those declarations of love are depicted as being the special sauce that makes the characters grow. It's a case of cause and effect. Neo died, Trinity said she loved him, and Neo was able to come back and tap into his full potential as the One. In Spider-Man, Peter spends the movie playing along with his secret identity and mostly treating Spider-Man as a separate person from himself. It was only after his final showdown with the Green Goblin, where his mask was destroyed and he is literally depicted as being half Peter, half Spidey, that this starts to change before it's more fully cemented in by MJ declaring her love to him a few scenes later. But even in the case of that one scene, the thing that gives Peter the final push to finally beat Norman in their fight was a threat from him that he's gonna make Mary Jane suffer, so it still kind of applies there too. Another interesting thing we can prod at is Peter's Spider-Man costume. Just like with my comment about the Green Goblin being green, this was obviously something that was already coded into the character, but Peter's costume is predominantly red and blue. You know, like the two pills Morpheus offered Neo. The costume, by design, represents the push and pull between being Peter Parker and Spider-Man, which is one of the character's defining traits. Hell, and this is something I only noticed while I was editing this video, Peter almost always wears something blue whenever he isn't Spider-Man in the first two movies. And Pete's growth and choice to use some Matrix jargon, choose the red pill, can even be picked out during his final fight with Norman and the subsequent Sinette. With his mask damaged and Peter shrouded in darkness for a lot of the fight, the red part of his costume is the most visible part of it that we can make out. It is the overriding thing on his mind at that moment, the choice to be a hero and put down the bad guy. Jumping over to Spider-Man 2, it's also the most visible part of his costume for us to look at when he quits being Spider-Man. In that famous recreation of Spider-Man No More, he's literally shown walking away from that symbolic red pill. And visually, everything around him is cooler and slightly blue on account of the scene taking place at night. Which is perfect. Pete walks away from being Spider-Man and for a brief portion of the movie has kinda taken the blue pill again by becoming the person he was before he ever got his powers. Borderline delusionally too, might I add, because the movie constantly reminds us of all the ways that the city is becoming an objectively worse place to live without Spider-Man around. And here's just a straight up bonus thing for you. The dream sequence that precedes this, even intentionally or not, visually recalls Morpheus catching Neo up to speed on what happened to the Earth ever since the machines took over. As for Peter finally deciding he needs to be Spider-Man again, well, that happens after he struggles to rescue a girl from a burning building in another callback to the first movie. And in case you haven't noticed it, fire is red, so it's almost as if he's moonwalking back to the trash can to get his Spider-Man costume and dry swallow a red pill. Here's a final comparison for the road. This one sort of veers into tangent territory, but I do think it still needs to be said. Rosemary Harris is a national treasure and steals every scene she had across the Raimi Spider-Man movies. She plays Aunt May so earnestly, but with this knowing side eye at every chance she can. While it's never explicitly stated that she knows that Peter is Spider-Man, she's also way too lenient about his disappearances and conveniently nurturing in just the way he needs her to be that you're left repeatedly asking yourself whether she knows more than Peter thinks she does.
Everybody loves a hero. People line up for them, cheer them, scream their names, and years later they'll tell how they stood in the rain for hours just to get a glimpse of the one who taught him to hold on a second longer.
Which isn't entirely unlike the Oracle in The Matrix, who has answers to everybody's questions but doesn't just hand them over to them. She knows that these characters are on a journey and that it's not her place to meddle with them, but rather to make sure that they stay on the right track. So, totally basically Aunt May in Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3. Oh, look, I mentioned Spider-Man 3 after all. But what does this all ultimately mean? Well, nothing, actually. These were just a bunch of really cool parallels between two movies, I noticed. At the end of the day, The Matrix and Spider-Man may seem to have a lot in common, but they're also very different movies where it counts. The Matrix is a pseudo-philosophical action movie that talks of technological enslavement and how we need to liberate ourselves from bondage and expand our minds. And Spider-Man is, well...
My name's the Human Spider.
I don't care. Get out there, you moron!
Whichever way you want to cut it though, putting The Matrix up against Spider-Man is a really interesting exercise. They're two movies that feel distinctly of their era. The Matrix is just about as 90s as a movie can get, while Spider-Man similarly is about as post 9/11 America as a movie can get too, thanks to stuff like the bridge scene. So for these two movies to have as much in common as I've outlined here isn't a condemnation of laziness on the part of Raimi and his team, nor is it a claim that he used these ideas to better effect. It's just pretty freaking cool. Like, I really can't put it any other way. It's really cool that all these ideas could get shared so fluidly between both movies, and the fact that they do so well shows how strong Raimi's Spider-Man was. It's also a testament to why I love rewatching movies in general. Like, it's really fun to be able to pick up a movie you know backwards and forwards, then see what aspects of it light your brain up in different ways. I really don't have anything else to say past that. I noticed some stuff, probably babbled about it for too long, and yeah, I mean, I hope it was kind of fun for you and that it gave you some decent material to half lucidly recite at a bar someday. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to drop a comment sharing your thoughts on it, as well as any other similarities you might be able to dust off, and leave a like on the upload or something. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by subscribing or by checking out my Patreon. On top of that, if you like podcasts, you can check out my podcast, Media Obscura. I host it with my best friend Raekwon and my girlfriend Sierra, and we recently came back for an episode dedicated to the 1980s BMX movie Rad. It's a full video episode, 3 cameras with clips, and it's available on my channel right now. And if you enjoyed that and you want more Media Obscura in your life, you could head over to my RSS feed or just search Media Obscura on your favorite podcatcher and get like 98 other episodes of the show. Additionally, if you like books, you like reading books, and you like when they're ebooks and not physical books yet, but really soon, I promise, you could check out my novel, Guppy Falls. It's a coming-of-age romantic comedy friends to lover novel. It's on Amazon. It's on Kindle Unlimited, which means you can read it for free if you're, subscribed to that. And yeah, I mean, it's there. Check it out or don't. So yeah, bye.
The chintz or the chenille in the dining room?
Whichever one's cheaper.
Mr. Jameson, it's like this. We double booked page 6. See, so both Macy's and Conway's both have 3/4 the same.
We sold out 4 printings. Sold out every copy. Tomorrow morning, Spider-Man, page 1 with a decent picture this time. Move Conway to page 7.
There's a problem with page 7.
And make it page 8 and get 10% off.